The glass shattered against the marble floor before Elena Hartley could even set down her tray, and the sound cut through the ballroom like a slap. "Watch where you walk, girl," said Lady Priscilla, not bothering to lower her voice. "Or did they not teach manners where you come from?" Laughter rippled across the room, sharp and cruel, bouncing off the golden chandeliers. Elena felt her face burn as every eye in the hall turned toward her. She was not a servant. She was a guest, dressed in the finest gown her family could afford, standing in a room full of people who had decided, the moment she walked in, that she did not belong. Her fiancé, Lord Weston, was nowhere near her. He stood across the room, laughing at something one of his friends had said, either unaware of what was happening or choosing not to notice. Elena bent down, gathering the broken pieces of glass with trembling fingers, while whispers slid around her like cold water. Merchant's daughter. No real title to her name. Wonder how much her father paid to marry her into this family. Elena had heard worse in the past few months, ever since her engagement to Lord Weston had been announced. She had told herself she was strong enough to endure it. She had told herself that words could not truly wound her. But standing there, glass biting into her palm, surrounded by people smiling with their teeth bared like something out of a nightmare, she felt something inside her crack. She rose slowly, chin lifted, and walked toward the edge of the ballroom, away from the light, away from the eyes. She did not run. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her run. But her steps quickened once she reached the tall glass doors that led to the private balcony, and the moment the cool night air touched her face, her composure finally broke. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to keep the sound of her crying trapped inside her chest, trying to disappear into the darkness where no one could see her shame. The party continued behind her, muffled through the glass, a world of silk and gold that had never wanted her in it. She did not know how long she stood there before she heard the voice. "Careful," it said, low and even. "The stone floor out here is older than it looks. It cracks if you press too hard." Elena spun around, wiping her face quickly, her heart lurching. She had thought she was alone. A man stood near the far end of the balcony, half hidden by shadow, his dark coat blending into the night behind him. She had not seen him arrive. It was as though he had simply been there the entire time, watching, waiting, saying nothing until now. "I did not know anyone else was out here," she said, her voice unsteady. "Forgive me, I will go back inside." "There is nothing to forgive," he said, "and there is no need to go back inside on my account." He stepped forward and moonlight caught the edge of his face. Elena's breath caught. She recognized the sharp line of his jaw, the dark hair swept back neatly, the eyes that seemed to hold winter itself. She had seen him earlier that evening, standing near the entrance of the ballroom, and every noble in the room had bowed their heads slightly as he passed, the way people bow before something they fear more than they respect. Duke Alaric Kensington. She had heard the stories. Some said he had inherited more power than any duke in 100 years. Some said he had never smiled once in public. Some said he had a memory for cruelty that never faded, that he remembered every insult and returned it tenfold in his own time, in his own way. And now he was standing 3 feet away from her, watching her wipe tears from her face. "Your Grace," Elena said quickly, dropping into a proper curtsy despite her shaking hands. "I did not realize." "Stand up," he said, not unkindly but firm enough that she obeyed at once. "There is no one out here to perform for. Just answer me one thing." Elena straightened, unsure what to expect. Duke Kensington was known for many things, but patience with the daughter of a merchant was not one of them. She braced herself for mockery, the same mockery she had received all evening, only sharper now, coming from a man whose words could end a family's standing with a single sentence. Instead, he studied her for a long moment, his gray eyes unreadable in the moonlight. "Who wounded you?" he asked quietly. The question startled her so completely that for a moment she could not speak. It was not what she had expected. It was not cruel. It was not curious in the way gossip was curious. It sounded almost like something else entirely, something close to concern, wrapped carefully so it would not seem too soft coming from a man like him. "I am fine," Elena said automatically, the words tumbling out before she could think. "I only stepped out for air." "You have glass in your hand," he said. Elena looked down, startled. She had not even noticed the thin red line across her palm where a shard had cut her while she cleaned up the mess on the ballroom floor. She curled her fingers instinctively, trying to hide it. "It is nothing," she said, "a small accident." "An accident someone laughed at," the Duke said. "It was not a question." "I heard it from across the room." Elena's cheeks flushed with heat despite the cold night air. She had not realized anyone important had witnessed her humiliation, let alone the most powerful man in the region. Somehow that made it worse. She looked away, toward the dark gardens below the balcony, unwilling to let him see how deeply the evening had cut her. "It does not matter," she said softly. "People will say what they like about me. I cannot change where I was born or who my father is. I knew this would happen when I agreed to marry into this family." "That does not mean it should happen," the Duke said. Something in his voice made her look at him again. There was no pity in his expression, which she was grateful for, because pity would have been unbearable. Instead, there was something colder, something more deliberate, like a man quietly filing away a piece of information he intended to use later. "You speak as though you understand cruelty, Your Grace," Elena said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "Forgive me, but most nobles I have met tonight seem quite comfortable with it." A faint, humorless smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Most nobles have never had cruelty turned against them. I have." Elena blinked. It was hard to imagine a man so composed, so untouchable, ever being on the receiving end of the kind of humiliation she had just endured. But something in the way he said it, low and certain, told her he was not exaggerating. "I am sorry," she said, because she did not know what else to say. "Do not be," he replied. "It taught me things that have served me well since." The music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the glass doors, a slow waltz that felt like it belonged to another world entirely. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how cold the night had become, or perhaps how exposed she felt standing here, having her private pain witnessed by a man whose opinion could shape her entire future. "You should return inside soon," the Duke said, his tone shifting back to something more formal, more distant. "Before your absence is noticed and used against you as well." "They will notice regardless," Elena said, a trace of bitterness slipping into her voice. "Lady Priscilla will make sure of it." The Duke's eyes sharpened slightly at the name, though his expression remained calm. "Priscilla Ashcombe," he said, almost to himself. "I remember her family well." Elena did not know what to make of the way he said it, quiet and measured, like a man setting a piece down on a board before a much longer game. She only knew that something about the way his gaze had changed made her feel, for the first time all evening, that perhaps she was not entirely without allies in this cold, glittering world. "Your hand," he said suddenly, nodding toward her palm. "You should have that looked at before it becomes infected." Elena looked down at the thin cut again, embarrassed that she had forgotten about it. "It is only a scratch." "Scratches left untreated can become far worse than they need to be," the Duke said. "Much like everything else tonight, it seems." There was something in the way he said it that made Elena look up sharply, searching his face for meaning. But he had already turned slightly, gazing out over the dark gardens, his expression unreadable once more, as though the conversation had reached a natural pause and he intended to let it settle before continuing. "Why did you come out here?" Elena asked quietly. "Surely a man of your position has better things to do than console a merchant's daughter on a balcony." "I did not come out here to console you," the Duke said. "I came out here because I saw what happened inside, and I wanted to know if what I suspected about this family's guests was true." "And is it?" Elena asked. He turned to look at her fully then, and for the first time that evening, she saw something flicker behind his cold gray eyes that was not indifference. It looked almost like recognition, as though he had found something he had been searching for without quite knowing it. More true than I expected, he said simply. Before Alina could ask what he meant, the glass doors behind them opened, spilling warm light and noise onto the balcony. Lord Weston stepped through, his expression annoyed rather than concerned, clearly having noticed his fiancée's absence at last. "Alina, there you are," he said, barely glancing at the Duke beside her. "You cannot simply vanish during a ball. People are asking questions." "Let them ask," the Duke said before Alina could respond, his voice suddenly carrying the full weight of his title. "I was speaking with Miss Hartley on a matter of some importance." Lord Weston's expression shifted instantly, surprise and something like wariness crossing his features as he registered exactly who he was addressing. "Your Grace, I did not realize you were out here." "Clearly," the Duke said, his tone cool enough that Lord Weston seemed to shrink slightly under it. Alina watched the exchange with quiet fascination, noting how quickly the balance of power shifted the moment the Duke spoke, how even her own fiancé, a man who rarely showed deference to anyone, suddenly could not meet the Duke's eyes for more than a second at a time. "I will return inside shortly," Alina said, finding her voice. "Thank you for your concern, my lord." Lord Weston hesitated, glancing between Alina and the Duke as though trying to solve some equation he did not have all the numbers for, before finally nodding and retreating back through the glass doors, leaving the two of them alone once more. "He does not deserve the discomfort I just caused him," the Duke said once the doors had closed again, "but I confess I did not entirely regret it." Alina could not help the small, surprised laugh that escaped her, the first genuine moment of lightness she had felt all evening. "You have a strange way of comforting people, Your Grace." "I am not known for comfort," he said. "I am known for other things." "Such as?" He studied her for a long moment before answering, as though deciding how much to reveal. "Patience and memory. I forget very little, Miss Hartley, and I forgive even less when it comes to cruelty aimed at people who have done nothing to deserve it." Alina felt a chill run through her that had nothing to do with the night air. There was a quiet promise buried in his words, one she did not yet understand but somehow knew was significant. She thought of Lady Priscilla's laughter, of the shattered glass, of the dozens of eyes that had watched her humiliation with open delight, and wondered exactly what the Duke intended to do with the information he had gathered tonight. "You should go back inside," he said again, his voice returning to its earlier calm. "I have matters to attend to as well." "Will I see you again?" Alina asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it, driven by a curiosity she could not fully explain. A faint, knowing look crossed his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. "Sooner than you think, Miss Hartley." With that, he turned and walked toward the far end of the balcony, disappearing through a side door Alina had not even noticed before, leaving her alone once more beneath the cold, distant stars. She stood there for a long moment, her cut palm forgotten, her heart beating strangely fast, replaying his words over and over in her mind. "Who wounded you?" No one had ever asked her that before. Not her father, who was too consumed with securing her marriage to notice her unhappiness. Not Lord Weston, who barely noticed her at all beyond what she represented for his family's finances. Certainly not the nobles inside, who seemed to take pleasure in creating wounds rather than asking about them. But a stranger, a man with a reputation colder than winter itself, had looked at her and seen exactly what she had been trying so desperately to hide. Alina finally turned and walked back toward the glass doors, smoothing her gown, wiping the last traces of tears from her face. She did not know what the Duke intended, or why he had taken such sudden interest in her humiliation. But as she stepped back into the noise and light of the ballroom, straightening her spine, lifting her chin, she felt something she had not felt all evening. She felt for the first time that she was not entirely alone. Lady Priscilla caught her eye from across the room, smirking, clearly expecting Alina to shrink beneath her gaze as she had done all evening. Instead, Alina held her stare for a long moment, something new and unfamiliar settling into her chest. She did not know it yet, but the balance of power in that glittering, cruel ballroom had already begun to shift. And by morning, every person who had laughed at her that night would understand exactly what it meant to draw the attention of a man who never forgot and never forgave. Morning came slow and golden over the Hartley estate, but Alina had barely slept. She lay awake most of the night replaying the balcony conversation in her mind, turning the Duke's words over like stones she could not quite fit together. Who wounded you? She still did not understand why a man of his standing would ask such a question, or why his voice had carried something close to warmth beneath its icy control. By the time she came downstairs, her mother was already waiting at the breakfast table, practically vibrating with excitement. "Alina, dear, you will not believe what has happened," her mother said, waving a folded letter in the air like a flag of victory. "A messenger arrived at dawn. Duke Kensington has requested your presence at Kensington Hall this afternoon." Alina froze halfway into her chair. "He requested my presence, alone." "With a chaperone, of course," her mother said quickly, though her eyes were bright with something between excitement and disbelief. "But yes, alone in the sense that no other family has been invited. Alina, do you understand what this means? The Duke never extends personal invitations. Never." Alina did not know what to say. Part of her felt a flicker of nervous anticipation, remembering the strange comfort of his presence on the balcony. Another part of her felt a growing unease, wondering what exactly the Duke intended, and whether last night's kindness had been genuine or simply the opening move of something far more calculated. "What does Lord Weston think of this?" Alina asked carefully. Her mother's excitement dimmed slightly. "He has not been informed yet, though I imagine he will hear of it soon enough. Alina, you must be careful. A man like the Duke does not simply take interest in someone without reason." "I know," Alina murmured, staring down at her untouched breakfast. "I intend to find out exactly what that reason is." The carriage ride to Kensington Hall took nearly an hour, winding through hills and dense forests before the estate finally came into view. Alina had expected grandeur, but nothing prepared her for the sheer scale of the Duke's home, its dark stone walls rising against the sky like something out of an old legend, its gardens stretching endlessly on either side, precise and disciplined, much like the man who owned them. She was led inside by a quiet, efficient housekeeper who said very little beyond polite instructions, guiding her through long corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors until they reached a study at the far end of the house. The housekeeper knocked once, then opened the door and stepped aside. Duke Alaric Kensington sat behind a large wooden desk, papers spread out before him in neat, organized rows. He looked up as Alina entered, and for a brief moment, something in his expression softened before returning to its usual careful composure. "Miss Hartley," he said, rising slightly, "thank you for coming." "Your invitation was rather difficult to refuse, Your Grace," Alina said, taking the seat he gestured toward. "Though I confess I am still unsure why it was extended." "Straight to the point," he said, something like approval in his voice. "I appreciate that." He rose from his desk and moved toward the window, hands clasped behind his back, studying the gardens outside for a long moment before speaking again. "Last night after you returned inside, I made a few inquiries," he said. "About Lady Priscilla Ashcombe, about her family, about the extent of the influence they hold within the noble circles you have recently been forced to join." Alina's stomach tightened. "And what did you learn?" "Enough to understand that what happened to you last night was not an isolated incident," the Duke said, turning to face her. "It has been happening since your engagement was announced, has it not? Small cruelties, public humiliations, whispers designed to make you feel as though you do not belong." Alina hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She had grown so used to hiding her pain, to pretending everything was fine, that admitting the truth felt almost dangerous. But something about the Duke's steady gaze made her want to be honest for the first time in months. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "It has been happening since the beginning. I thought if I endured it long enough, they would eventually grow tired of it. Instead, it has only grown worse." "It will continue to grow worse," the Duke said, because cruelty like theirs feeds on silence. The moment they sense weakness, they multiply it. The moment they sense fear, they sharpen it further. And you know this because, Elena asked, echoing his words from the night before. A faint, humorless smile crossed his face. Because I spent much of my youth watching someone I cared for endure exactly what you are enduring now, and I was too young and too powerless to stop it. I have spent every year since ensuring I would never be powerless again. Elena studied him carefully, sensing there was far more to that story than he intended to share, at least for now. But she did not press. Instead, she waited, sensing he had brought her here for a reason far beyond simple sympathy. I would like to propose something, the Duke said finally, an arrangement of sorts. What kind of arrangement? Elena asked warily. I intend to ensure that no noble in this region ever mocks you again, he said. Not because I feel pity for you, Miss Hartley, though I confess I do feel some, but because people like Lady Priscilla and her circle have operated without consequence for far too long, hiding their own failures and misdeeds behind expensive gowns and false smiles. I intend to change that. And what does that have to do with me? Elena asked. You will be my ally in this, he said. Publicly, I will extend my protection to you. It will be known that anyone who insults you insults me directly, and very few in this region are foolish enough to risk that. Privately, I would ask for your help identifying exactly who among them deserves the most attention. Elena stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. You want to use me as bait. I want to use you as an equal, the Duke corrected. You have spent months in rooms these people believe you do not belong in, which means you have heard things, seen things, that I have not. Combined with information I already possess, we could expose exactly the kind of people who built their reputations on cruelty and lies. And what do I gain from this, beyond simply not being mocked? Elena asked, her voice steadier now, some of her earlier nervousness giving way to sharp curiosity. Respect, the Duke said simply. Something you have been denied since the moment you entered noble society. By the time this is finished, Miss Hartley, no one in this region will dare look down on you again. Elena sat in silence for a long moment, turning the offer over carefully in her mind. It was a tempting proposal, one that promised an end to months of quiet suffering. But she was not foolish enough to believe it came without risk. And if I refuse, she asked, then I will still ensure that Lady Priscilla and her circle face consequences for their behavior, the Duke said. I simply believe the outcome will be far more effective and far more just if you choose to be part of it rather than a bystander. Elena considered this, studying the man before her, trying to determine whether his motives were as straightforward as he claimed. There was something guarded in his eyes, something that told her he was not sharing everything, but she sensed no malice in his intentions, only a controlled, deliberate kind of determination. Why me? She asked finally. You could have chosen anyone to help you. Why choose a merchant's daughter with no real standing of her own? The Duke was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer than before, almost as though he were admitting something he had not planned to say aloud. Because you stood on that balcony last night with glass in your hand and tears on your face, and instead of asking me to fix your problem, you told me it did not matter, that you had known this would happen when you agreed to marry into that family, he said. Most people in your position would have used my presence to their advantage immediately. You did not. That told me something important about your character. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, unsure how to respond to such an observation. She had not realized her quiet dignity had left such an impression on him. Very well, she said finally, straightening in her seat. I accept your proposal, Your Grace, but I have conditions of my own. Something flickered in his gray eyes, approval mixed with faint surprise. I am listening. I will not be used as a tool for your personal vendettas without understanding the full scope of what you intend, Elena said firmly. If we are to be allies, I expect honesty from you, not calculated half-truths. And I will not stand by silently while you punish people simply because they wronged someone in your past. If we expose Lady Priscilla and her circle, it will be because they deserve exposure, not because it satisfies some old grudge of yours." The Duke studied her for a long moment, something almost like respect settling into his expression. "Agreed," he said finally, "though I suspect you will find those two things are far more connected than you currently believe." "We shall see," Alina said. "We shall," the Duke agreed, a faint, genuine smile touching his face for the first time since she had arrived. "Now, Miss Hartley, let us begin with Lady Priscilla Ashcombe. Tell me everything you have heard whispered in rooms she assumed you were too invisible to matter in." Alina leaned forward slightly, a strange sense of purpose settling over her, replacing the quiet helplessness she had carried for months. "Where would you like me to start?" "Start with her finances," the Duke said. "I have suspected for some time that her family's fortune is not nearly as secure as they present it to be. If that suspicion proves true, it will be the first thread we pull." Over the next hour, Alina recounted every whispered conversation she could remember, every strained smile she had noticed on Lady Priscilla's face whenever certain topics arose, every small detail that had seemed unimportant at the time, but now, laid out before the Duke's sharp attention, began to form a clearer picture. He listened carefully, occasionally jotting notes, occasionally asking pointed questions that pushed her to remember details she had not realized she'd noticed. By the time the meeting ended, Alina felt something she had not felt in months. Not fear, not helplessness, something closer to purpose, closer to power, however small it still seemed. As she rose to leave, the Duke walked her to the door personally, an unusual courtesy she did not fail to notice. "Miss Hartley," he said just before she stepped outside, "whatever happens from here, you should know this was never about pity." "I did not think it was," Alina said quietly. "Good," the Duke replied, "because pity fades, what I intend to build does not." Alina walked back to her waiting carriage with those words echoing in her mind, unsure whether she felt reassured or unsettled by them. Either way, she understood one thing clearly as the carriage pulled away from Kensington Hall and back, toward the world of glittering ballrooms and cruel smiles waiting to test her once again. Nothing about her life would ever be the same. Years before Alina Hartley ever set foot in a noble ballroom, a much younger Alaric Kensington had stood in a similar room, watching helplessly as his own family unraveled beneath the same kind of cruelty she now faced. His mother, Duchess Vivienne Kensington, had once been the warmest presence in his life, a woman who filled their cold, formal home with laughter and music despite her husband's constant absence and disapproval. She had come from a family of modest wealth, much like Alina, and had married into the Kensington name for love rather than status. The noble circles had never forgiven her for it. Alaric remembered the whispers that followed her everywhere, the way certain women would fall silent and exchange knowing looks whenever she entered a room, the way his father, more concerned with appearances than affection, did nothing to defend her. He remembered watching his mother's warmth slowly dim over the years, extinguished one cruel comment at a time, until the woman who once sang him to sleep became a quiet, hollow figure who rarely left her chambers. He had been 12 years old when she died. The official explanation had been illness, but Alaric had always suspected the truth ran deeper than that. That years of quiet cruelty had worn her down long before any physical sickness finished the job. He had been too young then to do anything about it, too powerless to protect the one person who had ever truly loved him without condition. He had sworn, standing at her grave, that he would never again stand by helplessly while someone was destroyed by the same kind of casual cruelty that had taken his mother from him. It had taken him nearly 2 decades to build the kind of power that made such a promise possible. He had spent those years studying every noble family in the region with the same discipline other men reserved for warfare, learning their secrets, their debts, their hidden shames, quietly cataloging every piece of information that might one day prove useful. He had built alliances where he needed them and cut ties where he did not, until his name alone carried enough weight to make even the boldest nobles think twice before crossing him. But he had never used that power the way he intended to use it now. Sitting alone in his study long after Alina had left Kensington Hall, Alaric allowed himself, briefly, to think of his mother, and of the strange, unexpected parallel between her story and the young woman he had met on the balcony the night before. Alina carried the same quiet dignity his mother once had, the same refusal to let cruelty define her even as it clearly wounded her deeply. He would not fail to protect her the way he had failed to protect his mother. Whatever else came of this arrangement, he intended to keep that promise. Across the region, in a considerably less somber setting, Lady Priscilla Ashcombe sat in her private drawing room with three of her closest allies, discussing the previous night's events with growing unease. "The Duke spoke with her," Lady Priscilla said, pacing near the fireplace, her earlier smugness replaced by something closer to anxiety. "Alone on the balcony for nearly 10 minutes. Perhaps it meant nothing," suggested Lord Caldwell, a portly man whose family fortune had been dwindling for years behind a carefully maintained facade of wealth. "The Duke speaks to many people. It does not necessarily mean anything significant." "The Duke does not simply speak to merchants' daughters for no reason," snapped Lady Vera Ashworth, the sharpest-tongued of the group and Priscilla's closest confidant. "Especially not after we spent the evening ensuring she understood exactly where she stands among us." "You spent the evening ensuring it," Lord Caldwell muttered. "I merely watched." "You laughed along easily enough," Lady Vera shot back. Priscilla waved a hand impatiently, silencing them both. "This is not the time to argue amongst ourselves. If the Duke has taken some strange interest in Alina Hartley, we need to understand why and quickly. His attention is not something any of us can afford to have turned against us." "What could he possibly want with her?" asked the fourth member of their circle, a quiet, calculating woman named Lady Genevieve Marsh, who had said little until now. "She has no title, no significant fortune, nothing that would interest a man of the Duke's standing beyond simple curiosity." "Unless," Lady Vera said slowly, a look of dawning realization crossing her face, "he intends to use her against us." The room fell silent for a moment as the implication settled over them. "Against us how?" Priscilla demanded, though her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "We have done nothing that could interest the Duke. Our disagreements with the merchant girl are simply a matter of social standing, nothing more." "Are they?" Lady Genevieve asked quietly, her sharp eyes fixed on Priscilla in a way that made the other woman shift uncomfortably. "Because I recall certain conversations about your family's finances that would be quite damaging if they reached the wrong ears." "That has nothing to do with any of this," Priscilla said quickly, too quickly, her hands clenching at her sides. "Perhaps not," Lady Genevieve said. "But if the Duke has begun investigating you specifically, I doubt he would stop at surface-level matters. Men like him tend to dig until they find something worth using." Lord Caldwell's face had gone slightly pale during this exchange, and he cleared his throat nervously. "Perhaps we should simply apologize to the girl. Smooth things over before this becomes something larger than a few unkind words at a ball." "Absolutely not," Priscilla said sharply. "If we apologize now, it will look as though we have something to fear. It will only draw more attention to whatever the Duke suspects." "And if we do nothing?" Lady Vera asked. "If his interest in her continues to grow and we have done nothing to protect ourselves?" Priscilla was quiet for a long moment, her mind working quickly behind her carefully composed expression. "We continue as we have been," she said finally. "We make it clear to everyone in noble society that Alina Hartley does not belong among us, regardless of whatever brief attention the Duke has shown her. If we show weakness now, we lose everything we have built. Better to press forward and hope his interest fades on its own." "And if it does not fade?" Lady Genevieve asked quietly. Priscilla did not answer immediately, but something hard and determined settled into her expression. "Then we will deal with that when it happens. For now, we continue exactly as planned. The Harvest Gala is in 2 weeks. Every important family in the region will be present. It will be the perfect opportunity to remind Alina Hartley, and anyone else who might be watching, exactly where she stands." The others exchanged uncertain glances, but none of them voiced further objection. Whatever unease they felt about the Duke's growing interest in Alina, none of them were willing to risk Priscilla's displeasure by suggesting otherwise. As the meeting ended and her guests departed, Lady Priscilla remained alone in her drawing room, staring into the fire with an expression far less confident than the one she had shown her allies. She thought of her family's mounting debts, carefully hidden behind expensive gowns and lavish parties funded by loans she prayed no one would ever discover. She thought of the Duke's reputation for uncovering exactly the kind of secrets she had spent years concealing. For the first time since Alina Hartley's engagement had been announced, Lady Priscilla Ashcombe felt something close to genuine fear. Meanwhile, back at Kensington Hall, Alaric sat with a trusted advisor, a quiet, sharp-eyed man named Mr. Whitfield, who had served the Kensington family for over a decade, and knew better than anyone how to move unseen through the tangled web of noble finances and hidden secrets. "The Ashcombe family's debts run deeper than even I initially suspected," Whitfield said, laying out a series of documents across the Duke's desk. "Multiple loans taken against properties they no longer fully own, several of which have not been disclosed to their creditors as required by law." "How deep does it go?" Alaric asked, studying the documents carefully. "Deep enough that if the truth became public, Lady Priscilla's family would lose nearly everything within a matter of months," Whitfield said. "Their entire social standing rests on a foundation that could collapse the moment the wrong person begins asking questions." "And Lord Caldwell?" Alaric asked. "Similar situation, though less severe," Whitfield said. "His family fortune has been quietly dwindling for years. He maintains appearances through increasingly desperate loans, several of which come from lenders with rather unsavory reputations." Alaric leaned back in his chair, absorbing the information carefully. "And Lady Vera Ashworth?" "More complicated," Whitfield admitted. "Her family's finances remain stable, but there are rumors of certain business dealings that would not withstand close scrutiny, particularly regarding a series of contracts that appear to have been secured through less than honest means." "Continue investigating all three," Alaric said. "Quietly. I want undeniable evidence before we move forward with anything, not simply rumors and suspicions." "And the fourth member of their circle, Lady Genevieve Marsh?" Whitfield asked. Alaric considered this for a moment. "Leave her be for now. From what I observed at the ball, she seems less enthusiastic about their cruelty than the others. It is possible she may prove useful to us later if approached correctly." Whitfield nodded, gathering the documents back into their folder. "And Miss Hartley, how involved do you intend for her to become in all of this?" "As involved as she chooses to be," Alaric said. "She has already proven far more perceptive than most of the nobles who have spent their entire lives in that world. I intend to use every piece of information she provides." "Some might question the wisdom of relying so heavily on someone outside noble circles," Whitfield said carefully. "Some might," Alaric agreed. "But those same nobles have spent months underestimating her precisely because of where she comes from. That underestimation will be exactly what allows us to succeed." Whitfield studied his employer for a long moment, something knowing in his expression. "This is not simply about exposing corruption, is it, Your Grace?" "Not entirely." Alaric did not answer immediately, his gaze drifting toward the window and the darkening sky beyond it. "It began that way," he admitted finally. "I am no longer certain it will end that way." Whitfield said nothing further, simply nodding and taking his leave, allowing the Duke a rare moment of solitude with his thoughts. Alaric remained at his desk long after Whitfield departed, turning over the events of the past 2 days in his mind. He thought of his mother, of the promise he had made at her grave. He thought of Alina, standing on that balcony with quiet dignity despite everything she had endured. He thought of the Harvest Gala in 2 weeks and the opportunity it would provide. By the time the gala arrived, every secret Lady Priscilla and her allies had spent years hiding would be laid bare before the very society that had helped them build their false reputations. And Alina Hartley, the woman they had tried so hard to humiliate, would stand beside him as the architect of their downfall, rather than its victim. It was, he thought, precisely the kind of justice his mother had never received. Whatever else this arrangement became, whatever feelings might grow unbidden between himself and Alina in the process, that justice would be delivered regardless. He would make certain of it. Over the following days, Alina found herself at Kensington Hall more often than she ever imagined possible, always accompanied by a proper chaperone as etiquette demanded, always greeted with the same quiet formality by the housekeeper, and always led to the same study where the Duke waited with fresh documents spread across his desk. Their meetings had settled into a strange, comfortable rhythm. Alina would recount conversations she overheard, small details she noticed at social gatherings, the subtle tells that revealed who among the noble circle felt confident and who felt afraid. The Duke would combine this with information gathered through his own network of quiet investigators, slowly building a picture far more detailed than either of them could have created alone. "Lady Vera mentioned something odd last night," Alina said, seated across from the Duke's desk during one such meeting, a cup of tea cooling untouched beside her. "She was speaking with another woman about a shipment that had been delayed. She seemed far more anxious about it than the topic would normally warrant." The Duke looked up sharply from his papers. "Did she mention what kind of shipment?" "Textiles, I believe," Alina said. "Though the way she spoke of it, I got the impression there was more to it than simple fabric." "There likely is," the Duke said, making a note. "I have suspected for some time that Lady Vera's business dealings involve more than legitimate trade. This may be the thread that confirms it." Alina watched him write, admiring the precision of his focus, the way he seemed to hold entire webs of information in his mind at once, connecting details others would dismiss as irrelevant. It was strange, she thought, how quickly her fear of him had transformed into something closer to genuine respect. "May I ask you something, Your Grace?" Alina said. "You may," he replied, not looking up from his papers. "Why do you do this yourself?" she asked. "Surely a man of your position could simply hire others to handle such matters entirely, rather than spending your own time gathering information and planning strategy." The Duke set down his pen and looked at her directly, something thoughtful in his expression. "Because trust is a rare thing, Miss Hartley, and information this sensitive requires it. I have learned, sometimes painfully, that the fewer hands involved in delicate matters, the less likely they are to be mishandled or betrayed." "You do not trust easily," Alina observed. "No," he admitted, "I do not." "And yet you have shared a great deal of this with me," Alina said, "someone you met only days ago." Something flickered across his face, brief and difficult to read. "Perhaps that says more about my judgment than I intended to reveal." Alina felt an unexpected warmth rise in her chest at his words, though she quickly reminded herself that their arrangement was built on mutual benefit, not sentiment. Still, she could not deny that something had shifted between them over the past few days, something beyond simple allies working toward a shared goal. "There is something else I wish to discuss," the Duke said, setting aside the papers entirely. "The Harvest Gala approaches quickly. I believe it will be the ideal setting to bring everything we have gathered into the open." "So soon?" Alina asked, surprised. "We have only just begun uncovering the full extent of their misdeeds." "We have gathered enough regarding Lady Priscilla and Lord Caldwell to proceed with confidence," the Duke said. "Lady Vera's situation remains less certain, but I believe we will have sufficient evidence by the time the gala arrives, particularly with the information you provided today." Alina felt a flutter of nervous anticipation at the thought of confronting the very people who had spent months tormenting her, but beneath the nerves was something steadier, something that felt remarkably like courage. "What exactly do you intend to do at the gala?" she asked. "Reveal the truth," the Duke said simply. "Publicly, before the entire noble society that has allowed these people to operate without consequence for far too long. It will not be violent, nor will it involve any physical confrontation. Simply the truth, presented clearly enough that no one in attendance will be able to deny it or dismiss it as rumor." And what role would you have me play in this? Alina asked. The Duke considered this carefully before answering. That depends entirely on what you wish, Miss Hartley. I could handle the revelation entirely myself, allowing you to remain a quiet observer. Or, if you prefer, you could stand beside me as we present the truth together, making clear to everyone present that this was never simply about my personal grievances, but about justice long overdue. Alina thought of Lady Priscilla's cruel smile, of the shattered glass on the ballroom floor, of months spent quietly enduring humiliation she had told herself she deserved simply for being born into the wrong family. She thought of the quiet strength she had felt growing within her since that night on the balcony, strength she had not known she possessed until someone finally asked the right question at the right moment. "I want to stand beside you," she said firmly. "I have spent months being talked about, mocked, treated as though I have no voice of my own. I would like the opportunity to finally speak for myself." Something like pride flickered across the Duke's expression, quickly masked but not quickly enough that Alina missed it entirely. "Very well," he said, "then we shall prepare accordingly." Over the next several days, their meetings shifted focus slightly, moving beyond simply gathering evidence toward carefully planning exactly how the revelations would unfold at the gala. The Duke walked Alina through every detail, ensuring she understood precisely what would be revealed, in what order, and how best to present herself throughout the evening. "You must remain composed no matter what is said to you beforehand," the Duke instructed during one such session. "Lady Priscilla and her allies will likely attempt to provoke you once more before the evening's true events unfold. They will not yet realize what is coming." "I have had months of practice remaining composed," Alina said dryly. "I believe I can manage a few more hours." The Duke's mouth twitched with the faintest hint of amusement. "I imagine you can." As the days passed and the gala drew closer, Alina noticed subtle changes in how the Duke spoke to her, small moments of warmth that occasionally slipped past his carefully controlled exterior. He would sometimes linger a moment longer than necessary when walking her to her carriage. He would occasionally ask questions about her life beyond the current arrangement, her interests, her thoughts on matters entirely unrelated to their shared plans. Alina found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, looking forward to their meetings for reasons that had little to do with justice or strategy. "You seem distracted today," the Duke observed during one of their final meetings before the gala, watching her carefully across his desk. "I apologize," Alina said, startled from her thoughts. "I was simply considering everything that has changed since that night on the balcony. A few weeks ago, I believed I would spend the remainder of my engagement quietly enduring whatever cruelty came my way. Now I find myself preparing to publicly confront the very people responsible for it, standing beside the most powerful man in the region." "Does that frighten you?" the Duke asked. Alina considered the question honestly before answering. "A little," she admitted, "but less than the thought of continuing to endure their cruelty silently for the rest of my life." "Good," the Duke said quietly. "Fear used correctly can sharpen resolve rather than weaken it. I would be more concerned if you felt nothing at all." "And what of you?" Alina asked. "Does anything about this gala frighten you?" The Duke was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the window. "I fear failing," he said finally. "I fear that despite everything we have gathered, despite every careful plan, something will go wrong and those responsible will escape consequence once again, the way they escaped consequence with my mother years ago." It was the first time he had spoken so directly about his mother since their initial conversation, and Alina sensed the weight behind his words, the years of quiet grief and determination that had shaped him into the man sitting before her. "We will not fail," Alina said firmly. "Whatever happens at that gala, the truth will be known. That alone is a victory, regardless of how the noble circles choose to respond afterward." The Duke looked at her then, something unguarded in his gray eyes that Alina had not seen before, something that made her breath catch unexpectedly in her chest. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Hartley," he said quietly. "I could say the same of you, Your Grace," Alina replied, her voice softer than she intended. For a long moment, neither of them spoke, the air between them charged with something neither had acknowledged aloud, something that had grown steadily over the past several days without either of them quite noticing until now. Then the Duke cleared his throat and returned his attention to the papers on his desk, the moment passing as quickly as it had arrived. "We have much left to prepare before the gala," he said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone. "Let us continue." Alina nodded, though as she leaned forward to review the documents once more, she could not help but wonder exactly what this alliance was becoming, and whether either of them truly understood how much had already changed between them since that first, unexpected question on a moonlit balcony. Word of the Duke's growing association with Alina Hartley had, despite his best efforts at discretion, begun to spread through noble circles like wildfire through dry grass. By the time a week remained before the Harvest Gala, whispers followed Alina everywhere she went, though their tone had shifted considerably from outright mockery to something closer to cautious uncertainty. "They no longer know what to make of me," Alina told the Duke during one of their final planning sessions. "Yesterday, at the dressmaker's shop, Lady Marchetti actually greeted me with something resembling politeness. It was almost unsettling. Fear tends to have that effect on people who built their confidence on cruelty," the Duke said. "They sense the ground shifting beneath them, even if they cannot yet identify why." "Lady Priscilla has not shown any such politeness," Alina added. "If anything, she has grown bolder. Yesterday she made a point of mentioning, quite loudly, how strange it was that a duke would waste his time with someone so far beneath his station." The Duke's expression darkened slightly. "She grows desperate. Desperation tends to make people careless." Whitfield had continued his careful investigation throughout the week, and the picture that emerged was more damning than even the Duke had initially anticipated. Lady Priscilla's family debts had grown so severe that she had recently begun secretly selling family heirlooms, replacing them with clever forgeries to maintain appearances during social gatherings. Lord Caldwell's situation proved similarly dire, his desperate loans now connected to lenders known for less than honorable business practices throughout the region. But it was the information regarding Lady Vera Ashworth that ultimately provided the most damning revelation of all. "The shipment Miss Hartley mentioned," Whitfield explained during a private meeting with the Duke, "was not textiles at all, or at least not entirely. Lady Vera has been using her legitimate trading business as cover for smuggling goods that avoid proper taxation, generating significant illegal profit over the past several years." "Can this be proven definitively?" the Duke asked. "I have obtained documentation from a disgruntled former associate of hers," Whitfield said, sliding a folder across the desk. "Along with testimony from 2 dock workers willing to speak, provided their identities remain protected." The Duke reviewed the documents carefully, a grim satisfaction settling over his features. "This is more than sufficient. Combined with what we have on Lady Priscilla and Lord Caldwell, we have everything necessary to proceed." "And Lady Genevieve Marsh?" Whitfield asked. "You mentioned considering approaching her separately." "I did," the Duke confirmed. "Arrange a private meeting for tomorrow. If my instincts about her are correct, she may prove a valuable, if unexpected, ally." The following afternoon, Lady Genevieve Marsh arrived at Kensington Hall alone, her expression carefully composed but her eyes betraying a flicker of nervous curiosity as she was led into the Duke's study. She had expected, perhaps, an interrogation of some kind, given the rumors circulating about his investigation into her circle of friends. Instead, she found the Duke waiting calmly, along with Alina Hartley seated nearby, watching her with quiet, measured attention. "Lady Genevieve," the Duke said, gesturing for her to sit, "thank you for accepting my invitation." "I confess I was uncertain whether to accept," Lady Genevieve admitted, settling cautiously into the offered chair. "Given the current climate among my usual social circle, I imagined this meeting might not reflect favorably on my continued association with them." That depends entirely on how much you continue to associate with their more troubling activities, the Duke said carefully. I have reason to believe you have grown increasingly uncomfortable with the behavior of Lady Priscilla and her closest allies. Lady Genevieve was quiet for a long moment, her fingers twisting slightly in her lap. I have known Priscilla since childhood, she said finally. We grew up together, attended the same schools, were presented to society the same season. I have watched her grow increasingly desperate over the years, as her family's fortune quietly crumbled behind closed doors. And her treatment of Miss Hartley, the Duke asked, does that also trouble you? Lady Genevieve glanced toward Alina, something like genuine regret crossing her expression. It has troubled me greatly, she admitted quietly. I did not participate as enthusiastically as the others, though I confess I did little to stop it either. My silence, I understand now, made me complicit regardless of my private discomfort. Silence often does, Alina said, not unkindly, but with a firmness that made Lady Genevieve meet her eyes directly for the first time. I am sorry, Lady Genevieve said, and something in her voice suggested genuine sincerity rather than simple political maneuvering. I should have spoken up long before now. You have the opportunity to do so now, the Duke said. I intend to reveal the truth regarding several members of your circle at the Harvest Gala. I am offering you the chance to distance yourself from their misdeeds beforehand, rather than facing whatever consequences follow their exposure alongside them. Lady Genevieve's expression shifted through several emotions in quick succession: surprise, calculation, and finally something resembling relief. What would you require of me in exchange? Honesty, the Duke said simply. Any additional information you possess regarding their activities that might strengthen what we have already gathered. Beyond that, nothing more than your willingness to speak the truth if called upon during the gala itself. Lady Genevieve considered this for a long moment before nodding slowly. There is something I have not shared with anyone, she said finally. Regarding Lady Priscilla's forged heirlooms, I discovered the truth several months ago, quite by accident, and she made me swear never to reveal it. Would you be willing to reveal it now? The Duke asked. Yes, Lady Genevieve said, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. I believe I would. As the meeting concluded and Lady Genevieve prepared to depart, she paused at the door, turning back toward Alina with an expression of genuine remorse. I know an apology means little after everything you have endured, she said quietly, but I am truly sorry for my part in your suffering, however small it may have seemed to me at the time. Alina studied her for a moment before responding. Thank you for saying so, she said, and thank you for choosing honesty now, even if it comes later than it should have. After Lady Genevieve departed, the Duke turned to Alina with something like quiet satisfaction. That went better than I anticipated. She seemed genuinely troubled by everything, Alina observed. Perhaps not everyone in that circle is as far beyond redemption as Lady Priscilla and Lord Caldwell. Perhaps not, the Duke agreed. Though redemption requires more than simple regret, it requires action which she has now committed to providing. With Lady Genevieve's additional testimony secured, the final pieces of their plan fell into place with remarkable speed. Whitfield spent the following days quietly arranging for key witnesses to attend the gala, ensuring documentation remained secure and readily available, and coordinating with several trusted allies among the noble circles who had grown weary of Lady Priscilla's cruelty over the years, but lacked the courage to speak against her alone. Alina, meanwhile, found herself growing increasingly restless as the gala approached, torn between nervous anticipation and a steady, growing sense of purpose she had never experienced before in her life. You seem troubled tonight, the Duke observed during their final meeting before the gala, noting the tension in her shoulders as she reviewed the evening's planned sequence of events once more. I keep imagining every possible way this could go wrong, Alina admitted. What if Lady Priscilla finds some way to twist the truth in her favor? What if the noble society simply refuses to believe evidence presented against one of their own, regardless of how damning it may be? Then we will have still spoken the truth publicly, which is more than has ever been done before, the Duke said. But I do not believe it will go wrong, Miss Hartley. We have prepared thoroughly, gathered evidence beyond dispute, and secured testimony from multiple credible sources. Lady Priscilla built her power on lies and cruelty. Lies collapse quickly once exposed to sufficient light. Alina nodded, though the nervous tension in her chest remained. The Duke, noticing this, moved from behind his desk and settled into the chair beside her rather than across from her, an unusual break from their typical arrangement. "Whatever happens tomorrow night," he said quietly, "know that I do not regret involving you in this, regardless of outcome. You have shown more courage and clarity throughout this process than most people I have known throughout my entire life." Alina looked at him, surprised by the sincerity in his voice, by the way his careful composure had softened into something far more genuine than she had witnessed before. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing something worth protecting in me when everyone else saw only someone to mock." The Duke held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them, before finally rising and returning to his usual formal composure. "Rest well tonight, Miss Hartley," he said. "Tomorrow everything changes." Alina left Kensington Hall that evening with her heart racing, though whether from nervous anticipation of the gala or something else entirely, something that had been quietly growing between herself and the Duke over the past several weeks, she found herself unable to say with any certainty. Whatever the answer, she understood one thing clearly as her carriage rolled back toward her family's modest home, beneath a sky scattered with distant stars. By tomorrow night, the world that had spent months tormenting her would finally understand exactly what it meant to underestimate her. The night of the Harvest Gala arrived beneath a sky heavy with autumn clouds, the great hall of Ashcombe Manor glowing with candlelight and filled with every notable family in the region. Alina stood at the entrance in a gown of deep emerald silk, a gift from the Duke that had arrived at her home 2 days earlier with a simple note attached: "Wear this and remember who you are." She had never felt more nervous in her life, yet strangely, beneath that nervousness, she felt something steady and unshakable, a quiet confidence that had been growing within her since that first conversation on the balcony weeks ago. Lord Weston met her near the entrance, his expression unreadable as he offered his arm. Their engagement had grown strained in recent weeks, his discomfort with the Duke's involvement in her life becoming increasingly apparent, though he had said little about it directly. "You look lovely tonight," he said stiffly as they entered the ballroom together. "Thank you," Alina replied, scanning the crowded room until her eyes found the Duke standing near the far side of the hall, speaking quietly with Whitfield. He caught her gaze across the room and gave the faintest nod, a silent signal that everything remained proceeding as planned. Lady Priscilla spotted Alina almost immediately, her expression shifting from surprise to something sharper as she took in the quality of Alina's gown. She crossed the room quickly, her usual circle of allies trailing behind her, though Alina noted with quiet satisfaction that Lady Genevieve remained noticeably absent from their group. "How generous of the Duke to dress you so finely," Lady Priscilla said, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "Though I suppose even the finest silk cannot change where one truly comes from." "Perhaps not," Alina said calmly, refusing to let the comment shake her composure. "But it seems silk cannot hide certain truths either, Lady Priscilla. I imagine we shall discover exactly what tonight." Something flickered across Priscilla's face, confusion mixed with the faintest trace of unease, though she quickly masked it with a dismissive laugh. "How dramatic. I look forward to seeing what nonsense you have planned, merchant girl." She swept away with her allies, leaving Alina standing quietly amid the swirling crowd, her heart pounding steadily but her resolve firmer than ever. The evening proceeded normally for the first hour, music filling the grand hall as couples danced beneath glittering chandeliers. Alina danced once with Lord Weston, their conversation stilted and formal, before he excused himself to speak with business associates, leaving her free to observe the room and wait for the signal she and the Duke had agreed upon. It came just after the musicians paused between songs, when the Duke stepped forward into the center of the room, his presence immediately commanding the attention of everyone present. Conversations quieted gradually as guests turned toward him, sensing something significant was about to unfold. "Friends," the Duke began, his voice carrying easily across the silent hall, "I thank Lord and Lady Ashcombe for hosting this evening's gala, and I thank all of you for your attendance. However, before the evening continues, there is a matter of some importance I feel obligated to address." Lady Priscilla's expression tightened almost imperceptibly, though she maintained her composed smile, clearly uncertain what direction the Duke's words might take. "Over recent weeks," the Duke continued, "I have conducted a thorough investigation into certain financial and business practices among members of our noble society. I do this not out of idle curiosity, but out of genuine concern for the integrity our community claims to uphold, an integrity too often used as a shield while cruelty and dishonesty flourish behind closed doors." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, uncertain glances exchanged between guests who suddenly sensed the evening had shifted into something far more consequential than they had anticipated. "Lady Priscilla Ashcombe," the Duke said, turning directly toward her, his voice remaining calm but unmistakably firm, "would you care to explain the recent sale of your family's heirloom jewelry, replaced quietly with skillfully crafted forgeries displayed at events such as this one?" The color drained from Priscilla's face instantly, her carefully maintained composure cracking for the first time. "I do not know what you are referring to, Your Grace," she said, though her voice trembled slightly. "I believe you do," the Duke said, nodding toward Whitfield, who stepped forward carrying a small case. Opening it carefully, he revealed a delicate necklace that Priscilla had worn proudly at several previous gatherings, alongside documentation proving its authentication as a forgery. "This piece was examined by an independent jeweler earlier this week," the Duke continued. "The original, along with several other family heirlooms, was sold nearly a year ago to cover debts your family has worked diligently to conceal from noble society." Gasps echoed through the hall, whispers erupting immediately among the gathered guests. Priscilla's allies, Lord Caldwell and Lady Vera, shifted uncomfortably nearby, clearly sensing that whatever was unfolding would not remain contained to Priscilla alone. "This is preposterous," Priscilla said, her voice rising with panic barely disguised as outrage. "You have no right to make such accusations without proper evidence." "The evidence is quite thorough," the Duke said calmly, "and I would be happy to present it in full detail, along with testimony from those directly involved in the sale should you continue to deny it." At that moment, Lady Genevieve Marsh stepped forward from where she had been standing quietly near the edge of the crowd, her expression composed but resolute. "He speaks the truth, Priscilla," she said quietly, though her voice carried clearly through the silent hall. "I have known for months. I am sorry for my silence, but I cannot remain silent any longer." Priscilla stared at her former closest friend with an expression of pure betrayal, her mouth opening and closing without sound, unable to formulate any response that might salvage the situation. The Duke, sensing the moment had come to continue, turned his attention toward Lord Caldwell, whose face had already gone noticeably pale. "Lord Caldwell," the Duke said, "perhaps you would care to explain the nature of your recent business dealings with lenders known throughout the region for practices considerably less than honorable, and the mounting debts you have similarly concealed from your peers." Lord Caldwell stammered incoherently for several moments before finally falling silent entirely, his shoulders slumping in defeat as Whitfield produced additional documentation confirming the Duke's claims. Lady Vera, sensing the danger closing in around her, attempted to slip quietly toward the exit, but the Duke's voice stopped her before she reached the door. "Lady Vera Ashworth," he said, "I would advise against leaving quite yet. There remains the matter of your trading business, and the significant illegal profits generated through smuggling operations disguised as legitimate textile shipments. Lady Vera froze, her composure shattering entirely as she turned back toward the room full of stunned faces, understanding immediately that any attempt at denial would prove futile given the confidence in the Duke's voice. The hall erupted into a cacophony of whispered conversations, shocked exclamations, and scandalized murmurs as the full weight of the evening's revelations settled over the gathered nobility. Alina watched from where she stood, her heart pounding, as the very people who had spent months tormenting her stood exposed before the entire noble society they had spent years trying to impress. Lord and Lady Ashcombe, Priscilla's own parents, stood frozen near the edge of the room, their expressions a mixture of horror and humiliation as their family's carefully constructed reputation collapsed in real time before their closest peers. "Your Grace," Priscilla said finally, her voice small and desperate, all trace of her earlier arrogance completely gone. "Please, whatever you intend to do with this information, consider the impact on my family, on my parents who had no knowledge of my actions." "I have considered it carefully," the Duke said, his voice softening slightly, though it lost none of its firm resolve. "Which is precisely why I have not brought formal legal charges against any of you, despite having more than sufficient evidence to do so. However, the noble society you have spent years manipulating deserves to know the truth about those they have trusted, particularly regarding the cruelty each of you has shown toward those you deemed beneath your station." He turned then, deliberately, toward Alina, extending his hand toward her across the crowded room. Alina stepped forward, her heart racing, aware of every eye in the hall now turning toward her as she crossed the distance between them and accepted his hand. "Miss Hartley has endured months of humiliation at the hands of those standing here tonight," the Duke continued, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall, "simply for the crime of being born to a family without noble title. I would ask everyone present to consider carefully, moving forward, exactly what kind of society we wish to build. One built on cruelty and false superiority, or one built on genuine character and integrity, regardless of birth." The hall remained silent for a long moment, the weight of his words settling over the gathered crowd. Then, slowly, a few scattered guests began to applaud, the sound growing steadily as more joined in, until the majority of the hall stood offering quiet, respectful acknowledgement of the truth that had just been revealed. Priscilla, Caldwell, and Vera stood isolated near the center of the room, stripped of the false confidence that had defined them for years, surrounded now by the same society that had once admired them, watching instead with expressions ranging from disappointment to open disdain. Alina stood beside the Duke, his hand still holding hers firmly, feeling something she had not felt in months, perhaps ever. Not vindication exactly, though there was some of that. Something closer to relief, to finally being seen clearly for who she truly was, rather than the narrow, cruel judgment others had placed upon her. "It is not yet finished," the Duke murmured quietly, leaning slightly toward her as the applause continued around them. "But it is a beginning." Alina looked up at him, something warm and unfamiliar blooming in her chest as their eyes met amid the chaos surrounding them. "Yes," she agreed softly, "it is." The hours following the Duke's revelations passed in a strange, disorienting blur for everyone gathered at Ashcombe Manor. What had begun as a formal announcement quickly dissolved into chaos, as guests split into smaller groups, whispering urgently among themselves, some rushing to distance themselves from Priscilla, Caldwell, and Vera as quickly as possible, others lingering near the disgraced trio with expressions of morbid curiosity. Lady Priscilla's mother had collapsed into a chair near the wall, being tended by concerned relatives, while her father stood rigid and silent, staring at his daughter as though seeing her clearly for the first time in years. Lord Caldwell had already fled the hall entirely, unable to face the weight of dozens of judging stares. Lady Vera remained frozen near the center of the room, her expression hollow, as though she could not quite process how quickly her carefully constructed world had crumbled around her. Alina watched it all unfold with a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her, Satisfaction tangled uncomfortably with something that felt almost like pity, despite everything these people had put her through. "You seem troubled," the Duke observed quietly, noticing the conflicted expression on her face as the crowd continued to buzz with scandalized conversation around them. "I expected to feel nothing but relief," Alina admitted. "Instead, I find myself feeling something far more complicated." "That is not unusual," the Duke said. "Justice rarely feels as clean as we imagine it will, even when it is entirely deserved." As the night wore on and guests slowly began departing, whispering amongst themselves the entire way to their carriages, Lady Priscilla finally approached Alina directly, her earlier arrogance completely stripped away, replaced by something raw and desperate. "Please," Priscilla said quietly, glancing nervously toward where her mother still sat weeping softly nearby. "I know I have given you every reason to hate me. I know I do not deserve your mercy, but my family will be ruined by this. My mother's health is fragile. I am asking you, please, is there anything that can be done?" Alina studied her for a long moment, remembering every cruel word, every humiliating moment Priscilla had orchestrated over the past months. Part of her wanted to turn away, to let Priscilla face the full consequences of her actions without any softening. But another part of her, the part that had stood on a balcony weeks ago with tears on her face and glass in her hand, remembered exactly how it felt to be shown unexpected kindness in a moment of vulnerability. "The Duke has already chosen not to pursue formal legal charges against you," Alina said finally. "That decision was made before tonight even began. What happens to your family's reputation moving forward depends entirely on how you choose to conduct yourselves from this point forward." "Meaning what exactly?" Priscilla asked, a flicker of desperate hope crossing her features. "Meaning that cruelty built your reputation, and cruelty destroyed it tonight," Alina said. "If you wish to rebuild anything from these ashes, I suggest you begin by treating others, regardless of their birth or station, with the basic respect you failed to show me." Priscilla stared at her, clearly startled by the response, having expected either outright refusal or perhaps quiet gloating rather than genuine, if measured, guidance. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will not forget this." As Priscilla walked away to attend to her distraught mother, the Duke turned toward Alina with something like quiet admiration in his expression. "That was more generous than I expected," he said. "Perhaps," Alina said, "but cruelty answered with more cruelty simply continues the cycle. I would rather build something better than continue what they started." "You continue to surprise me," the Duke said softly. Lady Vera approached shortly after, her earlier composure completely gone, replaced by quiet resignation rather than desperate pleading. "I will not ask for mercy," she said simply, addressing both Alina and the Duke. "I understand the consequences of my actions, and I will face them accordingly. I only ask that my business partners, many of whom had no knowledge of the illegal aspects of our operations, not be unfairly punished alongside me." "That request seems reasonable," the Duke said. "I will ensure those without direct knowledge of your illegal dealings are treated fairly as this matter proceeds." Lady Vera nodded, something like genuine gratitude flickering across her otherwise hollow expression, before she too departed, leaving Alina and the Duke standing together as the last remaining guests filtered slowly out of the hall. Lord Weston approached last, his expression carefully neutral, though Alina could sense the underlying tension radiating from him. "I did not know the full extent of what you and the Duke had planned," he said quietly. "I feel I should have been informed, given our engagement." Alina studied him for a long moment, considering her words carefully. "Our engagement was arranged for reasons that had little to do with genuine partnership, Lord Weston. You have known that as well as I have from the beginning. I did not feel obligated to include you in matters you showed no interest in addressing yourself." Something flickered across his face, perhaps guilt, perhaps simple discomfort at being confronted so directly. "Perhaps that is fair," he admitted. "I confess I have given little thought to your well-being throughout these past months, focused instead on the practical benefits our union would bring my family. "I know," Elena said simply. Lord Weston nodded slowly, glancing briefly toward the Duke before returning his attention to Elena. "I believe, given tonight's events, it may be best if we reconsider our engagement entirely. I do not think either of us would find genuine happiness in a union built on such limited foundation." Elena felt a wave of relief wash over her at his words, relief she quickly masked beneath a composed expression. "I believe you are correct," she said. "I wish you well, Lord Weston, whatever path you choose moving forward." He nodded once more before departing, leaving Elena and the Duke finally alone amid the now nearly empty ballroom, candles flickering low in their holders, the earlier chaos of the evening settling into quiet exhaustion. "That resolves rather conveniently," the Duke observed, though Elena noticed a careful lightness in his tone that suggested more emotion beneath the surface than he intended to reveal. "It does," Elena agreed, turning to face him fully. "Though I confess, given everything that has happened tonight, I find myself uncertain what comes next." The Duke studied her for a long moment, something unguarded finally breaking through his usual careful composure. "May I be honest with you, Miss Hartley?" "Please," Elena said. "When I began this arrangement, I told myself it was purely about justice," he said quietly. "About finally using my position to prevent the kind of cruelty that destroyed my mother years ago. That remains true. But somewhere along the way, particularly these past few weeks, my reasons for continuing this alliance became considerably more personal than I initially intended." Elena's heart quickened at his words, though she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "You have shown more courage, more genuine strength of character than anyone I have encountered in years," the Duke continued. "I find myself, against my own careful instincts, caring for you far beyond what our original arrangement required." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest, unexpected tears pricking at her eyes, though these tears felt entirely different from the ones she had shed weeks ago on that same estate's balcony. "I have felt something similar," she admitted softly, "though I told myself it was simply gratitude, or perhaps admiration for everything you have done to help me. I am beginning to understand it may be considerably more than that." The Duke reached out, gently taking her hand once more, his usually composed expression softened by something warm and genuine. "Then perhaps, Miss Hartley, once the dust from tonight's events fully settles, we might explore exactly what that means together, without the constraints of our original arrangement holding us back." "I would like that very much, Your Grace," Elena said, a genuine smile spreading across her face for the first time in longer than she could remember. Outside the tall windows of Ashcombe Manor, the first pale hints of dawn had begun creeping across the horizon, chasing away the last remnants of night. Inside, standing together amid the quiet aftermath of justice finally served, Elena Hartley and Duke Alaric Kensington remained hand in hand, unaware entirely of what the coming morning would reveal about the true, lasting consequences of the previous night's events. By the time full morning arrived, word of the previous night's events at Ashcombe Manor had already begun spreading throughout the entire region, carried by servants, merchants, and the guests themselves, each retelling adding new details until the story took on an almost legendary quality among those who had not witnessed it firsthand. Elena returned home exhausted but strangely content, her mother waiting anxiously at the door, having heard fragments of rumors already circulating through their modest neighborhood. "Elena, is it true?" her mother asked, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace the moment she stepped through the door. The Duke exposed Lady Priscilla and her allies before the entire noble society. "It is true," Elena confirmed, allowing herself to be led toward the kitchen where her mother immediately began preparing tea, her hands trembling slightly with excitement and relief. "And your engagement to Lord Weston?" her mother asked carefully. "Ended," Elena said simply, "by mutual agreement. It seems for the best, given everything that has happened." Her mother studied her carefully, noting the small, private smile that flickered across Alina's face despite her obvious exhaustion. "There is something else, is there not? Something you are not telling me." Alina considered how much to share, ultimately deciding her mother deserved honesty after months of quiet worry over her daughter's difficult circumstances. "The Duke and I have grown close throughout this process," she admitted. "Closer than I initially anticipated when this arrangement began." Her mother's eyes widened with surprise, quickly followed by cautious hope. "Alina, are you saying what I think you are saying?" "I'm not certain what comes next," Alina said honestly. "But yes, I believe there is something growing between us that extends beyond our original arrangement." Her mother said nothing for a long moment, simply studying her daughter's face with an expression of quiet, overwhelming relief, before pulling her into another tight embrace. Meanwhile, across the region, the fallout from the Duke's revelations continued unfolding with remarkable speed. Lord Caldwell's remaining creditors, upon learning the full extent of his financial deception, moved quickly to seize what remained of his family's assets, effectively ending generations of nobles standing within a matter of days. He retreated from public life entirely, his once prominent family fading quietly into obscurity. Lady Vera Ashworth faced considerably more direct consequences, her smuggling operations formally investigated by regional authorities, resulting in significant financial penalties and the complete dissolution of her trading business. True to the Duke's word, her business partners who had no knowledge of her illegal activities were spared from similar punishment, though Lady Vera herself found her social standing permanently diminished, her invitations to noble gatherings growing increasingly rare as the weeks passed. Lady Priscilla Ashcombe's situation proved more complicated. Her family's forged heirlooms and hidden debts became public knowledge almost immediately, sending shockwaves through noble society that had once considered the Ashcombe family among the most respected in the region. Many expected her complete social ruin to follow swiftly. Instead, something unexpected occurred. Whether motivated by genuine reflection or simple necessity, Lady Priscilla began quietly working to rebuild her reputation, not through the same cruel manipulations she had relied upon previously, but through smaller, more genuine gestures. She began contributing time and remaining family resources toward local charitable causes, particularly those supporting families without noble title who struggled against the same social prejudices she had once so eagerly wielded against others. Alina encountered her occasionally over the following weeks, their interactions carefully polite, but no longer laced with the venomous undertones that had once defined their every exchange. "I have been thinking about what you said," Priscilla told her during one such encounter, weeks after the gala, as they crossed paths at a local market. "About cruelty answered with cruelty, simply continuing the cycle." "And?" Alina asked, genuinely curious. "I am trying to be better," Priscilla admitted, something humble and uncertain in her voice that Alina had never heard from her before. "I do not expect forgiveness, certainly not quickly, but I am trying." "That is more than I expected," Alina said honestly. "I hope you continue." As for Lady Genevieve Marsh, her decision to cooperate with the Duke's investigation, rather than damaging her social standing as she had initially feared, actually earned her quiet respect among those who valued genuine integrity over blind loyalty to old friendships built on cruelty. She and Alina found themselves growing into an unexpected but genuine friendship over the following months, bonded by their shared experience of that fateful gala night. The Duke, for his part, found his own reputation transformed as well, though not in the way he had originally anticipated. Where he had once been regarded with a mixture of respect and fear, whispered about as cold and calculating, noble society now viewed him through a different lens entirely, one that recognized the deep sense of justice underlying his careful, deliberate actions. More significantly, his growing relationship with Alina Hartley became increasingly difficult to keep private, despite both their efforts at discretion. Servants talked, guests speculated, and within a month of the Harvest Gala, it had become an open secret throughout the region that Duke Alaric Kensington had developed genuine feelings for the merchant's daughter he had once defended so publicly. "You do realize everyone already knows," Alina said one afternoon, seated comfortably in the same study where their arrangement had first begun weeks earlier, though the atmosphere between them now felt entirely different from those early, careful meetings. "Knows what precisely?" the Duke asked, though the faint smile tugging at his mouth suggested he understood exactly what she meant. "That you have been courting me quite seriously these past several weeks," Alina said, laughing softly at his feigned innocence. "Your household staff are terrible at keeping secrets, Your Grace." "I shall have to address that," the Duke said dryly, though his eyes remained warm with affection as he watched her. "Or," Alina suggested, setting aside the book she had been pretending to read, "you could simply make your intentions formally known, rather than allowing rumor and speculation to continue defining our relationship." The Duke rose from his desk and moved to sit beside her, taking her hand gently in his own, his expression growing serious despite the warmth still evident in his eyes. "Alina Hartley," he said quietly, using her given name rather than the formal address he typically maintained even in their private moments. "These past several weeks have shown me something I did not expect to find again after losing my mother so many years ago. A partnership built not on obligation or convenience, but on genuine respect, understanding, and yes, love." Alina's breath caught at his words, her heart racing as she searched his face for any sign of uncertainty and finding none. "I would like to formally court you," the Duke continued, "openly, without pretense or secrecy, if you are willing to accept such an arrangement. Not because our alliance requires it, but because I find myself unable to imagine continuing forward without you by my side." "I would like that very much," Alina said softly, tears of genuine happiness threatening to spill over as she squeezed his hand tightly. "Though I confess, given everything we have already faced together, formal courtship feels almost unnecessary at this point." The Duke laughed, a genuine, warm sound Alina had rarely heard from him before their arrangement began. "Perhaps," he agreed, "but some traditions are worth honoring, particularly when they lead toward something as meaningful as this." Word of their formal courtship spread quickly throughout noble society, met with considerably more acceptance than either of them had initially anticipated. The events of the Harvest Gala had fundamentally shifted how the region viewed both cruelty and character, and Alina Hartley, once mocked and dismissed for her lack of noble birth, now stood as a respected figure in her own right, admired for the quiet strength and integrity she had demonstrated throughout the entire ordeal. Months later, as autumn gave way to winter and the first snow began falling gently over Kensington Hall's expansive gardens, Alina stood once more on a familiar balcony, though this time surrounded by warmth and celebration rather than tears and humiliation. The Duke approached quietly, wrapping a warm cloak around her shoulders against the evening chill. "It is strange," Alina said, looking out over the softly falling snow, "to think that everything began right here, on a balcony not so different from this one." "Strange, perhaps," the Duke agreed, standing beside her. "But I have found myself increasingly grateful for that particular evening, despite the pain that led you there in the first place." "As have I," Alina admitted, "though I would not wish that particular pain upon anyone else." "No," the Duke agreed softly, "though perhaps some good may yet come from ensuring others never have to face what you endured. I have been considering establishing a fund, offering support and legal protection for those facing similar cruelty within noble circles, regardless of their birth or standing." Alina turned to look at him, warmth and admiration blooming clearly across her features. "I would like to help with that if you are willing." "I would want nothing less," the Duke said, drawing her gently closer against the cold winter air. As they stood together beneath the gently falling snow, Alina thought of the frightened, humiliated young woman who had once stood crying on a similar balcony, uncertain of her place in a world that had seemed determined to reject her entirely. She thought of the quiet strength she had discovered within herself throughout the difficult weeks that followed, and the unexpected partnership that had grown from a single, unexpected question asked in the depths of her darkest moment. "Who wounded you?" he had asked. She understood now, standing here months later, wrapped warmly in his arms beneath the winter sky, that the true answer to that question had mattered less than what came afterward. What mattered was that someone had finally asked, had finally seen her pain clearly enough to act upon it, transforming her deepest humiliation into the foundation for genuine strength, genuine partnership, and ultimately, genuine love. The nobles who had once mocked her so cruelly now offered careful respect, some out of genuine reformed character, others simply out of fear of the Duke's continued influence. But regardless of their motivations, Alina understood that the world she now inhabited had fundamentally shifted, reshaped by courage, honesty, and the quiet, unshakable resolve of two people who had refused to let cruelty define either of their futures. By the time the harshest winter storms finally passed, and spring began creeping slowly back across Kensington Hall's gardens, Duke Alaric Kensington and Alina Hartley announced their engagement formally, met with widespread celebration throughout the entire region. Their wedding, held the following summer, drew guests from every corner of noble society, including, quietly and humbly, Lady Priscilla Ashcombe, Lady Genevieve Marsh, and even a reformed, considerably more subdued Lord Caldwell. Alina stood at the altar that summer afternoon, dressed in flowing white silk, no longer the frightened, humiliated girl who had once hidden her tears in dark corners of noble ballrooms. She stood instead as a woman fully transformed, respected, loved, and utterly secure in exactly who she was and where she belonged. As Alaric took her hands before the gathered crowd, his gray eyes warm with genuine affection rather than their once careful, guarded distance, Alina felt a profound sense of peace settle over her entirely. The wounds inflicted upon her that first night, weeks and months ago, had long since healed, replaced by something far stronger, far more enduring than the fragile confidence she had once struggled to maintain. She had found not only justice, but genuine partnership, genuine respect, and ultimately, genuine love born from the simplest, most unexpected question a stranger had ever asked her. "Who wounded you?" She would never forget those words, nor the man who had asked them, nor the remarkable journey they had sparked together. And as she exchanged vows beneath the warm summer sun, surrounded by a society that had once rejected her entirely, Alina Hartley Kensington understood, with complete and unwavering certainty, that she had finally found exactly where she belonged. A year into their marriage, Kensington Hall looked different than it once had. The stern portraits still lined the corridors, but the rooms themselves carried new sounds, laughter drifting from the study where Alina now spent her mornings, the quiet bustle of visitors arriving with requests for help rather than invitations to judge. The fond Alaric had proposed that snowy evening on the balcony had grown into something neither of them fully expected. What began as a modest arrangement to offer legal protection for those facing cruelty within noble circles had expanded into a proper institution, staffed by clerks, advisors, and a small team of investigators trained by Whitfield himself. They called it the Hartley Trust, a name Alaric had insisted upon despite Alina's protests that it should carry his family's title instead. "It should carry yours," he had told her simply, "because you are the reason it exists." The trust received requests from all corners of the region, merchants' daughters facing similar humiliation to what Alina had endured, young men denied opportunities because of their birth, families quietly ruined by nobles who believed their titles placed them above consequence. Alina read every letter herself before passing the most urgent cases to the appropriate staff, unable to shake the memory of how it felt to suffer in silence with no one willing to listen. One such letter arrived on a bright spring morning, delivered by a nervous young woman named Margaret Whitby, who stood twisting her gloves anxiously in the entrance hall while waiting to be received. "Forgive me for arriving without proper notice," Margaret said once Alina welcomed her into the small receiving room set aside for trust business. "I did not know where else to turn." "There is nothing to forgive," Alina said gently, gesturing for her to sit. "Please tell me what has happened." Margaret's story unfolded slowly, hesitantly at first, then with growing urgency. She had been engaged for nearly a year to a young lord whose family had recently discovered her father's modest trade background. Information they had previously overlooked given the financial benefits the match provided them. Since the discovery, Margaret had endured months of quiet cruelty disguised as concern, whispered comments about her unsuitability, deliberate exclusion from family gatherings, and increasing pressure to end the engagement herself, so the family could avoid the appearance of rejecting her outright. "They want me to simply disappear," Margaret said, her voice trembling, "to spare them the discomfort of formally ending things, while making it clear I am not wanted." Alina listened carefully, recognizing painfully familiar echoes of her own experience woven throughout Margaret's account. When the young woman finished, Alina reached across the small table and took her hand firmly. "You are not required to disappear for anyone's comfort," Alina said, "and you do not have to face this alone." Over the following weeks, the trust worked quietly on Margaret's behalf, much as Alaric had once worked on Alina's, gathering information, identifying leverage, and ultimately arranging a private meeting between Margaret's fiancé's family and representatives from the trust. Unlike the dramatic public reckoning Alina and Alaric had orchestrated at the Harvest Gala, this resolution unfolded with quiet diplomacy. The family made to understand clearly that continued mistreatment of Margaret would result in exactly the kind of public exposure that had ended Lady Priscilla's reign over noble society months earlier. The engagement proceeded, though under considerably improved circumstances, and Margaret sent a heartfelt letter of gratitude to the trust several months later, describing a wedding attended by a family that had finally learned, however reluctantly, to treat her with the respect she deserved. "Every case is different," Alaric observed one evening as Alina shared Margaret's letter with him over dinner, "yet somehow they all carry the same thread running through them." "Cruelty disguised as tradition," Alina said. "Convenient excuses for treating people as less than they are." "Precisely," Alaric agreed. "Which is why the work we are doing matters, even when progress feels slower than we might wish." Not every case resolved so cleanly. Some families proved far more resistant to change than the Ashcombs or Margaret's fiancé's relatives had been, entrenched in generations of prejudice that no amount of evidence or diplomatic pressure could easily dislodge. Alina learned, sometimes painfully, that justice did not always arrive swiftly or completely, that some wounds required more patience and persistence than others to heal. Through it all, her partnership with Alaric deepened steadily, built not on the desperate circumstances that had first brought them together, but on genuine shared purpose and mutual respect that had only grown stronger with time. They argued occasionally over strategy, over how quickly to pursue certain cases, over the balance between compassion and firm accountability. But even their disagreements carried an underlying foundation of trust that neither had experienced in previous relationships. Lady Priscilla, true to her word, continued her quiet efforts at genuine reform. She visited Kensington Hall unannounced one autumn afternoon, nearly 2 years after the Harvest Gala, requesting a private audience with Alina rather than the Duke. "I wish to tell you myself," Priscilla said, seated somewhat awkwardly across from Alina in the same receiving room where Margaret had once sat. "I have begun sponsoring young women from merchant families seeking proper education, the kind previously reserved exclusively for noble daughters." Alina studied her carefully, searching for any trace of the old calculation that had once defined every interaction between them. She found instead something that appeared genuinely humbled, genuinely changed. "That is meaningful work," Alina said honestly. "I am glad to hear it." "I do not expect it to erase what I did to you," Priscilla continued. "But I wanted you to know that your words that night, about cruelty simply continuing cycles rather than ending them, stayed with me longer than I expected them to." "Thank you for telling me," Alina said. "And thank you for choosing to build something better rather than simply retreating from public life." Priscilla nodded, something like genuine relief crossing her features as she rose to leave. At the door she paused, turning back toward Alina one final time. "For what it is worth," she said quietly, "I believe the Duke chose well. Better than any of us realized at the time." After Priscilla departed, Alina sat alone for a long while, reflecting on how dramatically circumstances could shift given enough time and genuine willingness to change. She thought of the frightened girl she had once been, standing on a balcony with glass in her hand, and the woman she had become since, transformed not by vengeance alone, but by the deliberate choice to build something better from the wreckage of cruelty inflicted upon her. That evening, she found Alaric in his study, reviewing reports from the Trust's latest cases, and shared the details of Priscilla's visit. "Do you believe she has truly changed?" Alaric asked, setting aside his papers to give her his full attention. "I believe people are capable of change, given genuine reason and genuine effort," Alina said thoughtfully. "Whether she has fully changed or simply learned better methods of maintaining appearances, only time will reveal. But I choose to believe in the possibility, regardless." Alaric studied her for a long moment, admiration clear in his expression. "That capacity for grace, even toward those who wronged you so deeply, remains one of the qualities I admire most about you." "Perhaps," Alina said, moving to sit beside him, "it is simply easier to extend grace when one has already found genuine happiness of their own." Outside their window, the estate's garden stretched peacefully beneath a gentle evening sky, the same gardens where countless conversations, arguments, and quiet moments of connection had unfolded between them since that first unexpected question on a moonlit balcony. Alina thought of Margaret Whitby's wedding, of the countless other cases the Trust continued handling, of Priscilla's tentative steps toward genuine redemption, and of her own transformation from a mocked, humiliated outsider into a woman respected throughout the very society that had once rejected her so completely. The world had not become perfect. Cruelty and prejudice still lingered in corners the Trust had not yet reached. Old habits and old hierarchies still whispered through certain noble circles despite everything that had changed. But something fundamental had shifted, a crack in the foundation of assumed superiority that had once seemed unshakable, widening slowly but steadily with each case the Trust successfully resolved. Each young woman or man spared the kind of suffering Alina herself had once endured. As night settled fully over Kensington Hall, Alina leaned against Alaric's shoulder, feeling the steady warmth of his presence beside her, and allowed herself a rare moment of complete, uncomplicated contentment. "Whatever comes next," she said quietly, "I am grateful it comes alongside you." "As am I," Alaric replied, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "Always." And in that quiet study, surrounded by the evidence of justice patiently pursued and genuine love steadily built, Alina Hartley Kensington understood completely that the wound she had carried into that first fateful evening had long since transformed into something far more powerful than pain. It had become the foundation for a life dedicated to ensuring others need never suffer the same cruelty alone, and for a partnership built on the simplest, most enduring truth she had ever discovered. Sometimes the deepest wounds, when finally acknowledged and properly tended, become the very source of one's greatest strength.